and welcome to the No Holds Barred Wrestling Podcast on the Great American Sports Network. Your host today, Clint Schweitzer and Noah Groniger, being joined by our very special guest as our topic, the life and death of WCW, and who better to bring on than WCW veteran Scotty Riggs. Scotty, welcome to the show. How's everything going in your world, my man?
Oh, dude, I can't complain. Can't complain at all, man.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on. We are so excited. We're talking about the life and death of WCW. Of course, you were a part of that company for 6 years. And I want to kind of start at the beginning, Scotty, because, of course, WCW, in its inception, it was Ted Turner purchases Jim Crockett Promotions. It gets rebranded WCW 1988. I know you didn't break in to WCW till the early 90s, but what was kind of your base of knowledge of the company of WCW before you got there?
Wow, that's a good question. Basically, I was a fan of it back then. I was in college when Crockett's Promotion. Basically, I grew up on that with the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, with Georgia Championship Wrestling, the talent they had there from the Ricky Steamboat to Flair, Blackjack Mulligan, and Briscoes, all those cats. Basically, grew up on that, but always watched it on either a local channel, in the area, or basically would come on TBS, so like Clash of Champions, stuff of that sort. It was what I grew up on, and anything that really happened business-wise, I couldn't even, from what everybody else has already talked about, probably had really lived it, I had no idea of. But basically, that was a time where if you wanted to watch wrestling, I was born in Georgia and raised in the South and everything of that sort. If you wanted to watch wrestling, you watch TBS. Like once a month, we would get WWF, the three W's with the F, would come on the USA channel, and we get Madison Square Garden Wrestling once a month. So I never really grew up on that or knew that, but I always had the NWA, WCW was always on my TV growing up and in college. And so, going into the business side of it, I really don't know that much. I was a huge fan of it back then.
Well, of course, WCW acquires most of the talent. The NWA World Champion at the time was Ric Flair. WCW has a great start. They've got Flair. They bring up Sting, who's an up and comer. Dusty Rhodes is doing the booking at the time, but yet still not a lot of live attendance numbers. Like you said, you got the clashes on the Superstation. Ted Turner wants to compete with Vince McMahon, and by the time you get there in '93, the company is still fledgling a bit. But so in 1994. Eric Bischoff becomes executive vice president of WCW. You guys get Hulk Hogan. Now, you were there before, during, and after Hulk Hogan. So what was your thoughts about bringing in the Hogans and Savages and Eric Bischoff becoming executive vice president? Because that was a huge turning point in the company.
Well, Hogan coming in was good name-wise, name recognition. Talent-wise, he hadn't progressed in a decade, basically. So that mentality he had back then. You can watch, if you watched anything from the 80s he did the same thing in the mid-90s and came into WCW. And so it was great for people with a brand name. He'd been off of wrestling for a bit with WWF. And so to get him was a big coup for the company. The only thing that hurt the company is being there and watching it and seeing it. He came in with the Vince McMahon mindset. If he didn't have the title meant nothing. Was the one thing he would always say. He didn't want to chase the title. He wanted to have the title. Everybody had to beat him as the big baby face. So some of the psychology wasn't right. It was not the same psychology NWA used, where you had the heel champion that always seemed to almost always get beat, but somehow cheat his way, and it made people want to buy tickets to see it. Hogan's mentality was, he wanted to be the champ. He was going to vanquish every foe. And in the South, where wrestling was, it suspended disbelief. You believed, even though you had an inkling, even though no matter what was said, you still bought into the psychology of good versus evil, and wanted to see the evil get beat. And some of the evil always triumphed, so you always paid another ticket to go see the evil try to get beat again. And so with that mentality, Hogan changed that mentality. So it turned off some of the fans. I mean, being able to sit there and hear fans and, in the live crowd, to be able to sit there away from a monitor near the curtain and listen to stuff. You just heard fans say, this is not what we're used to. And it was just a difference in what different wrestling psychologies are. But I mean, it was definitely good for people at home to want to tune in to see Hogan again, to see some of this, you know. It brought over some of the fans. When Savage came in, you know, it was a good thing for that. The name recognition was great, and it was really cool to pick their minds sometimes and ask them a few questions here or there and become friends with them and get to know them a little bit. But, you know, again, I got a huge break from January of 95 to August of 95. I left WCW on the Arn Anderson basically gave me the advice to get out of here before you get labeled and stuck under a glass ceiling. You know, I left and went to USWA. So for 8 months, I never watched it because I was always wrestling. Never kept up with the programming, any of it. So I missed a good 8 months of what they were doing. You know, so to me that was great. I enjoyed the break of it before I went back into it full time with those guys.
Well, in 1995, WCW debuts their show Nitro to compete with Raw in their show. How big was that for the company at the time, and what did the wrestlers think of show Nitro coming on?
Dude, it was huge. I mean, it was like it was a bolster to be to go live on TV. That's what every wrestler wanted to do. Wrestler clashes were so big back then because it was a chance to get on live TV and do your stuff live and know that, you know, it just upped the ante for everybody. And I still remember me and Marcus wrestled Six-Setter and Buckhouse Buck at the first Nitro at Mall of America. We were a dark match. And just the vibe of that, the energy in the dressing room, and nobody knew Luger was there. So for him to pop in on the show and stuff like that, I mean, he was kept in a private room away from everything, and nobody knew he was there until he showed up at the gorilla position and came to the curtain. Everybody was like, oh, my God. I mean, some of the wrestlers didn't even know, and there was only maybe 15, 20 of us there, so it wasn't like a big Nitro or a big show where everybody, they bring about 30, 40 guys. You only had a core group of matches that were going to perform. I mean, Liger was there working filming, so the main thing that WCW had when Nitro first started was it could bring in talent from Japan, from, you know, the old WWF talent came in, and there was a new crop of talent coming in. So you had a good youth mix, and then, you know, like I said, with Liger coming in, it was great to see talent like that coming from Japan over. So that's one thing that we had that WWF doesn't have and never had was that talent exchange. We could bring something fresh and something new that the fans would go, oh my God, look at that. And we brought it onto live TV. It's like the Mexicans, when Ubi and those guys came in, and Conan, and, you know, they had that new style of wrestling that nobody had seen before. So that was an attractive bonus. So, I mean, that was the one thing that was such a breath of fresh air. They just breathed new life into everybody that was on the crew.
Absolutely, this was a huge turning point because you know, at this point Eric Bischoff is basically given free reign. He's given free, you know, money by Ted Turner and said, "Hey, go spin, go get talent. Let's compete with Raw." They did that. You mentioned a lot of the reasons why it was successful, bringing in the Luchadors, bringing in the guys like Liger, having a very strong undercard. Of course, at the top of the chain was still guys like Hulk Hogan. Now, it all changed for good in summer of '96 when the NWO comes in. Now, the NWO was probably the most riveting storyline in the history of professional wrestling. It live attendance shot through the roof. Monday Nitro ratings defeated Raw for 2 straight years. How big was that? Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, you alluded to them. They came in and made it seem as if it was an absolute invasion of WWE to WCW, and that set you guys apart. That put you guys over the top. Strong undercard, people like you, Benoit, Jericho, the Luchadors, but then NWO comes in. How big was that?
Again, it was a thing that was huge for the company. It was a thing that was strong for the ratings. It was strong for the fans, which is what you want to see. You know, it's just the bonus you have is something that everyone, like you said, the invasion idea. It was actual WWF guys that were coming in. Even though it was Nash and Hall and not Diesel and Razor, people knew the personas, people knew the individuals. You know, they didn't know the real names probably, but they, you know, they knew the shape and the figure that was on their TV was something they had just seen on one TV or one, you know, one channel, and all of a sudden it's on the next. So you can tune over and see what's going on. Is this really an invasion thing? Is there something going on here? Because everybody at one point during the Raw time was doing an ECW invasion. You know, there was always some sort of other company invading another company, and the fans bought into it. It was, again, it was that exchange of talent that we always had with New Japan. They didn't really, WWF didn't have it. They had their own crop of guys. So they kind of used the ECW guys a little bit. But WCW, to get to one point that WWF didn't have, because they were their own entity, and they just happened to be on a channel. We were owned by TBS, like you acknowledged earlier. And from what I know and from what I saw in the back, we always had the standards and practice guys there. We always had somebody, it was more like the morality police. We couldn't do the attitude era of all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that they put on their TV, basically. We had somebody that said, you had the Nitro girls and extra sex appeal. And that was it. We couldn't go any further. But our wrestling action blew theirs away. We were in a whole bunch of comic book characters and, dumpster men and cops and repo guys and all that stuff. We weren't a bunch of characters. We were wrestlers that had names and personas that came with the names. So fans, again, in the South especially, and then across the countries that grew, fans are like, oh my gosh, this is great. When Nash and Hall came in, they were Nash and Hall. They weren't Raider and Diesel. So fans were like, these are legit guys coming in. So that legitimacy in what you see on TV and what you receive it to be and what you believe into it and with everything else that comes along with it, that's what drew us for the longest amount of time away from, fans tuning in to us. And that was what really grew us. We gave them an option of believing what we're doing or watching a cartoon show.
WCW really embraced counterculture before the WWE Attitude Era. I mean, just look at Raven's Flock. I mean, you were a part of Raven's Flock, kind of an Offspring shirt wearing, grungy group of guys, and you wearing the eye patch. Like that was a part of that. The NWO with its kind of gang mentality. It was definitely counterculture. And I wanted to talk about this because this leads us to Starrcade '97, Scotty, because I think this is where the chinks in the armor kind of start popping up, because you have probably the biggest main event in WCW history, the biggest buy rate in pay-per-view history, which was Starrcade '97. Some of the biggest hype, which was done beautifully by your company, WCW, hyping Sting versus Hogan as the main event. Sting, who hadn't spoken in a year, comes in. It's Sting and Hogan, and it was botched, horribly botched, because you have Hulk Hogan, who'd been running scared of Sting for a year, comes out playing guitar on his belt. He's not scared. They have a normal match, and he beats Sting clean 1, 2, 3 before the crap goes down and Sting gets kind of the crap victory. Is that for you? Like, do you agree with that? Do you think that's kind of where the chinks in the armor started? Do you think that was horribly botched?
The fan in me agrees with you. The wrestler was in the back and kind of saw what was going on, kind of knew in a sense that was Hogan being Hogan.
Sure.
Instead of again, it's that same mentality. Hogan, his whole mindset was if he didn't have the belt didn't mean anything. And even as a heel, he had to be, all of a sudden it was the same mentality. He had to be fed all these baby faces to beat. And so, I wasn't in the room when Hogan and Sting were giving the finish and what they wanted to do and how they wanted to portray it, how they wanted to use Bret Hart in there and inject him into everything with Patrick, the referee, who was the NWO referee before. There was a whole mixture of what they were trying to do. But again, when the fans saw it, the fans were like, what the heck just happened? They really, that's where they all went, this is just, they didn't buy into it anymore. That was definitely a chink in the armor that went, the fans just went, it's hard to put into words. It's something you had to live and breathe, I guess. But the fans back then themselves just went, wow, is this what we're going to get shoved down our throats? We don't care about watching it. Because it was the same old thing. It was the same old story. It's going to be the same old synopsis all over and over and over again. Again, like I said, if Sting went out there and they would have had the real big battle, if Sting could, maybe finally, like he did against Flair, his Great American Bash, I guess it was 89 or whatever it was.
90, yeah.
And he came back.
90, yeah.
But 90, well, I was somewhere around that time.
Very close.
But, when he had that and he vanquished Flair in Baltimore at the Great American Bash, that was huge. The fans went, yes. That was his big rebuild, in a sense, after being away from with the knee injury. So with him being away, creating the Crow character, why not re-bolster and re-energize that and let him vanquish him? Hogan didn't want that. And that's where some of that cancer that everybody claimed at the time, I hate to use that word, but that's what everybody always said, you always heard it. Those guys brought in the cancer that ended up slowly building into it, and then toward that time, ate up everything. When that finish didn't come across right, that was a cancer that kind of ate up WCW. Not the people, but just the politics of it.
Well, you mentioned it, and that brought a question into my mind. How important and how vital was Hulk Hogan coming to WCW, and how big was that for the company? But also at the same time, how detrimental was it with his politics and creative control card in the back?
Um, Not having to deal with it in one sense of I've never wrestled Hogan and never ever did, never would. He didn't view me that way, and so when you're sitting in the back and you're in the dressing room, basically, or you get to the building, this is how it went in a sense. There's usually like two big locker rooms, for the town to get in for the wrestlers, announcers, blah, blah, blah. You had a women's dressing room that was not huge, but it was good enough for 5 or 6 girls, Nitro girls, whatever, to do their thing. And then you had one huge other room set up, a locker room, that was always set up. It was always there. It wasn't like somebody went and looked for their own private dressing room, but it was set up for Hogan, Nash, Hall, X-Pac, whoever wanted to go in there that was part of their group. And they separated themselves from everybody. And once they started doing that, that's when there's a little bit of, okay, Hall, when he first walked in, he goes, hey, guys, how you doing? Just remember, tuck your chin on the finish. Tuck your chin on the finish. That's what he would tell guys. He kind of said it jokingly, but it was also rubbed it very wrong. So, when Bret Hart came in, one of the coolest guys I ever met in my life, big star, came up to me one time, when he first came in there catering. He said, hey, Scotty, how you doing? Can I sit down with you? I'm like, yeah. And we sat there, and he talked to me. He knew my drop kick. He knew some of the stuff that I did here and there. He took the time to meet, like, everybody and sit down and talk with them and say, hey, I want to be part of the group, part of the team. He dressed with us. In the big dressing rooms, Macho, Bret Hart, Kurt Hennig, Rude, Bulldog, you name it. Everybody that was a part of the Road Warriors, and they came back in. The Saturday, and they came back in. Flair, Sting, Luger, we all dressed in the same big, 20, 30 guys to our dressing room. And we didn't go get our separate dressing rooms. When those guys came in, the WWE guys that we ran for, and I call them, Hogan and his group, they all went to their private dressing room, had their private catering, and that really did build a gap between how we viewed them and how they viewed us. They viewed us as we were going to put them over. That was the whole thing. They were friendly to a point after shows, but during the shows, they had their own thing. And that's, again, another part of just their mentality. They came in going, hey, we're the stars, you're the talent.
Well,
and they looked at everybody that way. From Arn Anderson to a Flair, this year trying to put us over. We put y'all over back in the early 90s when we were, Oz and Diamond Stud and all the other stuff that they did. Now they're trying to come back and go, you're putting us over now. Your talent, we're stars.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate because instead of being this 88-week run of huge success, there was a lot of politics going on. If you weren't part of our group, your talent, you're putting us over. The Flock, we were the best heels of the company, and the only ones of us that won matches were basically Saturn and Raven. The rest of us lost matches, but we were over like Rover, and we had heat from jumping on Benoit and Page and that stuff, and that was a great build. People wanted to see us go against NWO, but they didn't view us as that we weren't worthy to face them, so they didn't want to have anything to do with us. People pitched ideas to him. They didn't want to work with Raven. He wasn't worried to work with us.
Yeah,
so he just sat back and said, okay.
Absolutely. And around that time, you got guys finally had enough. Chris Jericho has talked about receiving FedEx envelopes with nothing in it. He leaves to WWE.
Oh, I got those too. he wasn't the only one. When I read that, I went, yeah, I probably received at least 10 of those envelopes that had nothing in them.
So
spending money on.
Stuff's going wrong at this point. And you talked about Oz and Diamond Stud. I also forgot to mention from the Jim Herd days of WCW, the Ding Dongs, my favorite tag team of all time. Forgot to mention that in the onset of the of WCW. That was in 1989. That was a good one. But as we go off more, and WCW still having success in the 97 and 98, and you guys still doing great numbers, and you guys finally WCW pushes a homegrown star in Goldberg. Whether he deserved it or not, whether he was too green or not, that's not for us to decide. That's management pushed him. That's great. He had a great look. He went on. He did great. Now at this time, you talked about the politics. It's as rampant now as ever. Kevin Nash has the book. Goldberg's got the streak, and it ends at Starrcade '98. And all of a sudden, Goldberg's character kind of takes a plummet after that. Of course, he also punched a window out of a limousine, severed tendons in his hand, and got off TV for 8 months. But another story. But what were your thoughts about Goldberg and how WCW used him?
I thought it did great with Bill. I mean, the funny thing about it is, again, Bill came out of nowhere, which is what was hyped about. I remember, I think his match against Hugh Morris.
Yep.
Bill was standing in the ring, and he was at the entrance, you know. And everybody thought, I was just going to put over Hugh, and then, you know, he kicks out of Hugh's, you know, laughing matter finish, everything else, and all of a sudden people went, who is this guy? And they were calling him Bill Goldberg, you know, and then all of a sudden, weeks went by, and I finally just started calling him just Goldberg. And that just, I mean, it just took off. It was one of those things that it was a natural happening. It wasn't force-fed, you know, it was something that they just let build. And the fans got with him. I remember when I wrestled him, I think it was in Tampa, Florida. It was like his maybe fourth or fifth match. Bill was hungry. He was wanting to learn. You know, he knew he didn't know everything. He was limited. But the thing was, when I sat down with him to figure out what we were going to do, you know, we brought Lex and Sting in and put a match together because Lex and Sting knew him from the gym and stuff. And so they didn't poison his mind. They were there to help him. They were there to watch this guy grow because they saw something. He had that it factor, I guess, as they always say. They saw something in him that could grow. He wasn't going to be a technical star, but he was going to be a monster. And it built, and it grew. And the thing is, again, I never sat in on the meetings, so I never knew exactly what those guys' mentalities were to do this, do that. I knew Bill was getting worried about having too long of a streak, and so even in his mind, he thought maybe it might be time to end this thing. But I think that also might have been fed at the time from what other people were telling him. So looking at people who wanted to see him grow, there were certain guys that were looking to grow off of him. You know, there were too many egos. There was when we started there in '95, we were a big team with the Nitro. By the end of '99, when I left there and went to ECW, everybody was looking out for themselves. It was very cutthroat there. People were walking on eggshells. So that's when you went from a huge team that was starting to sing with Nitro to a bunch of egos of who started off the show. The 9 o'clock hour, who was on there. The 10 o'clock hour, who was on there. And the 5-minute overrun, who was always on there. Think about it.
No, absolutely. And that's around the time as we get to Halloween Havoc 98, which, you know, is another highlight that we point to as kind of just another disaster that led kind of to the eventual demises. And Halloween Havoc 98, man, huge main event. Everyone wanted to see DDP and Goldberg. And management, I don't know if it's Bischoff, I don't know who, you know, you can really put the blame on in this situation. Just the show running overtime, the pay-per-view gets cut off. Fans don't get to see the end of the main event. And not only that, it's a disaster for another reason, because you also had the Hogan Warrior disaster. They bring in Ultimate Warrior. They have this feud. Hogan, of course, wants to avenge the loss from WrestleMania 6. So he's trying to burn him, and they try to set this thing on fire. It's a disaster. The whole pay-per-view is a disaster. You were still there. What are your memories of Halloween Havoc 98, and just when you start alienating your fans, that's when things really start going off track.
I mean, I was never in the rooms, so I'm not going to, you know, I kind of knew what was going on. Warner came in, very private person, but he was also friendly. You know, he was one of those guys that you walk up and introduce yourself to, and he was like, hey, how you doing? You know, he'd be friendly, but he didn't want to, like, embrace everybody. Kind of like, unlike Brett, who wanted to embrace everybody and be part of the team. He knew he was coming in for one thing, get a couple paychecks, built to an event, leave. He was going to be done. It was kind of like a one-shot thing for him. But that was where Hogan, again, and those guys had that creative control. And when you have guys come in and when you let the inmates run the asylum, that whole phrase, Bischoff never was a boss. He never was the creative control behind everything. Like in WWE, Vince McMahon has a final say-so on everything. Whatever goes on his show, he has a final say-so. Boom, boom, boom. Eric didn't have that. He had to cater, in a sense, to Hogan and those guys, to Nash and Hall, and everybody had their in their contracts. She catered to them because sometimes those guys would come into TVs and there'd be this list of boards when Terry Taylor was booking. Terry would have everything up around 3 to 4 hours for the show, about 4 or 5 o'clock. The big board of when you were on, your time, your match, who you were wrestling, this segment, whole 9 yards, who had interviews. Those guys would stroll in about 6. Look at the board and go, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, I want to put them over here, and have to change the entire show. We would go on live on a show with one match, and that would be Pigman and Juventud. And we used to make a joke of it. Pigman versus Juventud match number 7,842. Because they would always start that off, because they could do 2 segments, have a great match, and while they're trying to put shit together to cater to these guys' wants and desires. And when you're doing that, you don't have a guy going, no, I'm the boss, I'm the booker, I'm in control of this. This is what you're doing. And this is how I'll say so, because this is our show we're putting together, and we worked on this, worked these angles out. When you have the inmates doing that creative control clause, it's not going to be successful. It's just not going to go and not being. It's not going to build what the fans want to see. It's not going to build what anybody else wants to do. It's going to create some negative feelings in the back for everybody else that everything gets thrown up into upheaval. And this happened almost every week. I remember Thunder was supposed to be its own show, have different angles, everything. And when these guys saw themselves another chance to be on live TV twice a week, boom, they were on it. And they took that over.
Absolutely. And
when Thunder was a live show one week, take show the next week, they didn't want to be on the tape show. They only wanted to be on everything that was live. None of them worked Saturday shows. They only worked pay-per-views, Mondays, and live Thunders. That was it.
Yeah, I mean,
so that was definitely a derogatory part of time. I'm not going to put it all on it. It was not one guy. It was this guy doing his thing. This guy wanted to do his thing. It was a hodgepodge of guys, and not one guy being a boss. You had a Kevin Sullivan who was a booker. You had Arn Anderson who was a booking committee. Terry Taylor. All these guys that were given control by Bischoff to write the shows, to put the shows together, and everything else. And all these other guys went, I'm not doing it. You're Terry Taylor. I'm this guy. I'm not doing that. And Terry would go and hissy fits because he worked his butt off to put these shows together with what they were doing. And these guys didn't want to do it. So what do?
Yeah, I mean,
go to business.
Sticking with the politics in the back, the bad feelings, the bad decisions, we move on to the finger poke of doom. Hollywood Hogan from NWO Hollywood against Kevin Nash, who has the heavyweight title for NWO Wolfpack. They're facing off. Hogan taps him on the shoulder. Nash goes down. Hogan's the new championship. The new champion. The NWO comes together. As a middle school kid, I couldn't love it anymore. As an NWO fan, loving to see them come together. Hindsight being 2020, seems to be a really bad decision. Putting all those teams together. Way too many cooks in the kitchen. What were your thoughts on the finger poke of doom?
Didn't care for it. I mean, literally, especially when you're sitting there in the dressing room and got a huge crowd and everything that's going on and it's all pumped up and you go out there and do that. And to them, it was hilarious because it was, because they were in on it and everything else, the guys who did it. And they thought it was going to be great. But now you look back at it, I'm sure a lot of them, back then it was great because, again, the mentality is different. You're a little bit younger, and you're in control, you're doing your own deals, and you think this is going to be great because it puts the band back together. It's something. But if you go out there and just, you do something and you think it's great, it's your own amusement, and you're trying to maybe amuse the guys in the back, but you got to think about the fans. Those are guys who are paying their money, buying tickets, watching the show, doing ratings and everything else. If you don't think about them, you're not going to be successful. And when they did that, and they tried to put it over like this huge thing, the fans just went, they just pooped on it. And that was the thing. If you don't listen to your fans, what's going on, you're trying to do your own deal, and you want the fans to like it no matter what you do, it just ain't going to be successful. I mean, it's hard to look back on it 12, 13, 14 years later and go, wow, it's, but back then it was possibly an idea. They bantered around and went, man, this is going to be great. The fans will love it. But you don't sit back and go, do we sit back and look? Do we really want to do this? Or should we go out there and, there's got to be I don't know what it would be, but maybe a different idea of doing the same thing? Nobody knows. I mean, but again, you also got to think about, we got 30,000 people in this arena, 1 million people or two watching at home. What are you going to think about this? It's just going to be something that we can really, we want to put the band back together, but how do we do it in a better way? I don't know. It's easy to sit back and wonder, but it's not always an answer. And I can't give you an answer, but that's just the best observation I can have. It was something I thought was the most ridiculous thing you ever saw, and I thought it was stupid, but I didn't have a voice in opinion at the time. Just sat back and went, okay, I'm done. I'm going home.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want people, because I knew that was okay. I didn't want to go out to a club or dinner or anything. I'm just going home, because I knew that was going to be the question. Everyone, what was that?
Hey, Hulk Hogan likes to say to this day.
Because I knew fans were going to ask. Didn't want to be around it.
Hey, Hulk said it, man. He said, yeah, I worked that night, got paid too. That's kind of like the mentality of he and like guys like Nash at the time. Like, yep, worked, got my finger on someone's shoulder, pinned him, got paid for it too. And that's just kind of like the mentality. By this time, it's 99 and you leave in 1999. And I know that I don't think you were there when Vince Russo gets brought in, but I know you know a lot of people from WCW. I want to ask you because Vince Russo comes in and it's just the company's a disaster, but it gets completely off the tracks at this point. Vince Russo brings in David Arquette. He becomes WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the same belt that Harley Race and Ric Flair and people like that have worn, and Dusty Rhodes. And here's David Arquette coming in, an actor winning the world title. He's coming up with ridiculous angles, kind of trying to compete with the end of the Attitude Era with just weird, random, hardcore matches that made no sense. What do you know about Vince Russo, and is it even possible? Is it even in the realm of possibilities that he was literally sent there to sabotage the company? Is that possible, or is that just kind of a fan thing to say?
The only conjecture I can give of that is if Russo was sending her there for that, which I doubt it,
Yeah.
he would have been hired back by Vince, by McMahon in a heartbeat, as soon as everything was done. He'd still be in their payroll to me. Would never had to go to work for TNA or anybody else. And if he was sent there as that type of company assassin, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have had to keep looking for work afterwards. So that's one way I look at it. If he was, and the other way I look at it, if he was such a great writer and stuff like that, which I heard he was back then, but he would write 30 ideas, if Vince would take one of them. That was the conjecture that was going around. This guy came in. The only thing that I was there for a short period of time with Russo for a few months, and the only thing I remember hearing him say was he was here to write some stuff that's going to be great storytelling, it's going to be great for TV, it's going to change things the way you do TV, and he was going to be writing for a lot of different characters and create some things for people that he's seen. He kept saying, I'm here to write a show for you guys, to make you guys successful. Everything. And even when I left, the first thing I've noticed is he went from being a writer to where he wrote himself into a star. Wrestling fans are seeing guys that are wrestlers win titles, be the head guy on a show. I mean, when Eric, when he was a commentator, he spent, a couple of years being a commentator. And people knew he was the executive of the company and stuff. He rolled when the credits, Eric Bischoff was on there. So people knew who he was. He finally became a character after a few years. Russo became a character after a few months, not just a character, but the lead character on the show. So that's where I was actually glad I was out of there. I hated it for my friends who were still there, guys I still talked to, that the stuff they were dealing with, they were unhappy with, turning Goldberg's heel, all the things he did just didn't make sense, except in his mind, because he was sitting there going, I was a success for the Attitude Era because of my writing. No, again, anybody who knew the situation, no matter what he plugs now, no matter what's said and what's done, he did a few things to help guys create characters. But the thing is his writing can only go so far. It's the guys who give him the writing too that have to go out there and actually do it that make it work. You know, Steven Spielberg can be a great writer, but if stuff like Harrison Ford and those guys, yeah, I can remember who wrote Star Wars.
George Lucas.
Spielberg. Yeah, Lucas. Nobody knew who Lucas was, but you know, if it wasn't for him writing stuff, but if it weren't for the actors, Star Wars would never have been great. You know, if you can write a book, no matter what it is. That 50 Shades of Grey book is supposed to be coming out.
My favorite.
Dramatic, you know, it's supposed to be that dramatic thing of like people who read it are like, oh my God, this is great. But if it doesn't translate to the movie, no matter who the actors are, you can put all these great actors in it, but it doesn't translate, it's not going to work. It'll be a flop.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's my favorite book of all time, Scotty, and I'm really glad that you brought that up as a great example of a possibility of a movie gone awry from writing. But let's get to...
But, you know, it just all boils down to the same thing,
Sure.
like Russo, and I have, you know, I barely know the guy, so I really don't have a whole lot to say against him or anything like that, but just when I watched what he did, when I watched the show, when I watched how a guy who came in, when I was there for the beginning and said he's going to be a writer, he's going to help create people and do things, and all of a sudden you see him as the main guy on the character on the show, you just go, wow, you know, and when they're doing the hottest period of time, you're doing a 4-something rating, both shows are doing 3s and 4s and close to 5 ratings during that 88-week period. You know, when we dominated everything, but wrestling was doing great. To the point where I've read things and seen things where he said, well, when I wrote, you know, for Nitro, we were doing 2s and close to 3s and compared to what they were doing, and then I left and these guys took over and they were doing low 2s and everything else, and it's like, dude, you know, so you wrote some great shows for Raw or for Nitro that had good ratings, not great, not like they used to be, but you did okay. What did your Thursday ratings do? What did your Saturday ratings do? How did your pay-per-views do? What were your buy rates, not buy rates, but what were your ticket sales for all the shows that you wrote for? You know, how was your audience? Because you only had to write a TV show, because he thought he was writing just a TV show. He got to realize what he's writing. He's got to sell tickets, got to sell merchandise, got to do all these other things. So you may claim, I wrote a great TV show and we had good ratings. Yeah, what did the other part of the business do where you were the head writer, made yourself a head star above the law of the wrestlers who's supposed to be your true product? What did they do then? That's why not only was, yeah, and just when I said earlier about standards and practices, about, you know, your moral police, you try to do all these kinky things with the extra girls, made them all wrestlers, made them all this, made them all that. And you sat back and go, wow, you know, he's changed the product. He's got standards and practices he's got to deal with, but he's trying to do all this thing. He's poking fun of a guy with Bell palsy when he had his writing cohort for our come in there and make fun of JR and barbecue sauce and all the other stuff they did. You got to know when you're working for TBS who you got to work with also with standards and practices. They were going to kibosh a lot of stuff that you did. And so when the LOL merger came in there, you had shoots and guys going, this is the garbage we're putting on a show that we're investing in now, get rid of it. If you probably wrote a better, stronger, higher rated quality product that fans were getting beforehand, WCW may still be around today. Who knows?
Yep.
Again, that's one of those wild things you think about. But you know, it went away in 2001. It's been pretty much, you know, except for how it's been revived on the network now, it's pretty much dead except for that on YouTube.
Absolutely. Just watch Spring Stampede 99 on WWE Network the other day. I was talking to you about that on Twitter a few months ago. Probably the best pay-per-view of the post-97 era WCW. But yeah, like you said, AOL Time Warner merger occurs, and WCW is dead in the water. Vince McMahon buys it. 2001, it all comes to an end. Of course, you were gone by then. But Scotty, like as we look back, kind of our final thought here, looking back at a company that had highest of highs and the lowest of lows, like what do you think WCW's legacy is? And now we're talking about 13 years later, but you know, you got guys like us still tweeting at you, still having you on the show with the memories from those years. I mean, what do you think the lasting legacy of WCW is 13 years later?
Well, I mean, I look at it and go, the legacy is it provided some probably the greatest wrestling and suspending disbelief that you ever saw. Back from the NWA all the way through. You know, we had the Ricky. Everybody complains nowadays about how many times you see like John Cena against Randy Orton,
Yeah.
or John Cena against anybody basically.
Yeah.
Or,
Exactly.
but I'm just saying, just to mention what product is of today and who your champion is,
Yeah.
or who your top draw is. That thing that had Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair doing 60-minute matches, 40-minute matches on TVs and 60-minute matches on house shows, 4 or 5 nights a week. And the fans ate it up. You got to realize they were drawing houses of 30,000, 40,000 people before in the 70s. And now they think drawing the 75,000 people coming across the world for WrestleMania is great, or whatever, or their highest number they want to say is great. They were going to have that with local TV. I remember Zabisco told me him and San Martino drew like 30,000 people at Shea Stadium in New York for with Hogan against Andre in a mid-card match.
Yeah.
So that was way back then in the 70s, early 80s maybe, before Hulkamania. They were drawing 30,000 people on local TV just in the New York area. Now they can draw 75,000 people internationally for WrestleMania at Superdome. I mean, we put 30,000 people in the Superdome for a Nitro.
Yep.
So, you sit back and go, the legacy WCW brought to wrestling itself was the sport of it still. It was before the sports entertainment of it. People still wanted to see the match of the rookie team. Even though it was an hour of Steamboat and Flair, or even Sting and Flair doing a 45-minute match on Clash of Champions. So what I'm saying is it brought wrestling to a forefront, not the show. Of course, things have changed. Things are always going to expand and grow. But you gotta look back and go, man, some of the best matches you ever saw were on Nitro. Were World Championship Wrestling. Some great angles, some really good things that were there that people grew up on. Now it's a whole different thing. They're being put in one product. They're not really giving that taste of what it was, and so you sit back and people go, oh, it's all fake, it's all this, it's all that. The one thing they didn't say back then is they knew maybe it was, but they still believed,
Yeah.
And that was the thing. They don't believe anymore because they don't have anything to believe in.
Yes.
But back then they believed. That was the one thing at WCW. They made you believe. We all took, talent. We all took pride in going out there and having great matches. We wanted to put the best in our art form and making you believe what we were doing. Nowadays, they go, oh, we're all nice guys out on the ring. When I was part of the flock, when we were sat ringside, we got cussed out. We had stuff thrown at. People hated us, and it was great. That sold tickets.
Yes.
I didn't want to be part of the flock with the iPads. You had this kid come up and go, can I have your autograph? Get a picture taken with you? Sitting ringside when I was supposed to be this grumpy grouch.
Yeah.
You wanted them to have that picture all towards you.
Well, so many memories.
I didn't want to be a cool heel like NWO. I wanted to be a guy that was hated.
Well, you guys had a great run. The Ravens flock, of course, you, former tag team champion, former member of Ravens flock, Scotty Riggs. Cannot thank you enough for joining us. We've been talking about the life and death of WCW. And sadly, yes, it did all come to an end, but so many memories, as we've all talked about many of them here with you, Scotty. Hope all is well with you, and we always love talking wrestling with you. Let's make it happen again, and I'll tell you what, I hope you have a happy new year. And again, we just can't thank you enough for joining us. The life and death of WCW. We pretty much summed it all up, didn't we, Scotty? I think we covered everything.
I don't know about covering everything because there's guys out there with better perspective than I had that actually lived a few more parts of it. I'm not going to say it was all bad or all good, but it was definitely a heck of a roller coaster ride.
Well, hey.
And that's what made it great in one sense. It was a roller coaster ride.
It was that for us fans as well. And again, thank you so much for joining us, Scotty. You have a great Happy New Year. Life and Death of WCW. Join us on our website, Great American Sports Network, to check out all of our sports and professional wrestling related material. And you can find this interview there at GreatAmericanSportsNetwork.com. Scotty Riggs, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great one, my man. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Be well.
You too. Take care, Scotty.